Today we're going to talk about the Carolingian Dynasty. Now, a dynasty, as we know, is a family of rulers, and the Carolingians are very important because they are going to be the founders of the seeds, at least, of modern Europe. So the Carolingians were at first rulers of France, a Frankish ruling family, and then they became emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. So this is a very, very simple timeline of important events of Carolingian rule. We're going to start out talking about a very important battle, the Battle of Tours, and then we're going to move on to talk about how the Carolingians become official rulers of France, or the Franks. And then we're going to talk about this really important guy who was a Carolingian named Charlemagne and how he becomes the king of the Franks, builds an empire, and becomes the emperor of a new empire called the Holy Roman Empire. Then we're going to talk about a historic treaty, the Treaty of Verdun, that is going to divide the Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire into three parts. And then we're going to mention briefly the end of the Carolingian rule. So our story begins, the story of the Carolingians begins with a guy who is basically a secretary, the mayor of the palace for a Merovingian, which is another family of rulers, a Merovingian king of the Franks. And so this guy manages the king's house, and his name is Charles Martel, and his nickname is Charles the Hammer. All of the Franks have nicknames. Now, since he is basically a secretary, what you need to know is that he is way more powerful than the king himself. If you think about it, in any business, if you're going to set up an appointment, you go through the secretary first. And if the secretary doesn't like you, you don't get an appointment. The secretary knows what the boss is up to at all points. The secretary is basically the gatekeeper of any business organization. So, Charles, our secretary, is very, very powerful, but he's going to be even more powerful when the Moors, or the Muslims who are living down in Spain, go up to try to invade France and to take over the Frankish kingdom. Now, Charles is going to defeat them at the Battle of Tours, and he's going to keep the Moors, or the Muslims, out of France. So our friend Charles here is going to have a family. He's going to have one son named Pepin the Short. There we are with those Frankish nicknames, Pepin the Short. And then Pepin the Short's going to have a brother named Carloman. Carloman is this guy here. Now, Charles the Hammer dies like everybody does. And the Franks have this very fair tradition of dividing their holdings among their sons. They don't just leave it to the oldest son, they split it evenly. Now that's fair, but that's not very good if you're trying to hold a kingdom or a bunch of wealth in one place. So fortunately for Pepin, Carloman dies. And Pepin is going to become the sole heir to the Carolingians. Now, Pepin makes nice with the Pope, and the Pope talks the Franks into electing Pepin to be the king of the Franks. So this is the beginning of the Carolingian Dynasty. Pepin is the king of the Franks. So Pepin is going to have sons as well. He has one son named Charles the Great, and Charles the Great, his name is Charlemagne, which means Charles the Great. And he has a brother named Carloman. And since I couldn't find a picture of good old Carloman, we've got a couple of his coins here. So Pepin dies, like everybody does, and the kingdom of the Franks is divided among Charlemagne and Carloman. Now, very, very conveniently for Charlemagne, Carloman dies, and Charlemagne gets the entire kingdom. So now he's got the kingdom of the Franks, and Charlemagne is going to go out and he's going to conquer other areas, and he's going to create a Frankish empire. This does not go unnoticed by the Pope. And so Charlemagne in 800 AD marches down into Rome on Christmas Day, kneels before the Pope to take Mass, and the Pope places a crown on his head and says, "Charlemagne, you are now the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire." Well, that's fantastic. However, the person who puts a crown on your head also has the power to take it off. So by crowning Charlemagne, the Pope has made himself above Charlemagne. So the Pope is incredibly powerful. So Charlemagne has a family himself, including one surviving son named Louis the Pious, a very religious guy, as you can see by his cross and that little halo behind his head. And Charlemagne dies, and he leaves his empire to Louis the Pious, who's not a great leader, but is able to have 3 sons. One son is named Lothair, the other son is named Louis the German, and the last son by a different wife is called Charles the Bald. And that's probably ironic because Charles the Bald was supposedly a very hairy guy. So Louis dies, like everybody does, and like all good Franks, the empire is to be divided among all 3 of his sons. Well, his sons don't like that. They all want to be emperors, so they go to war and they fight each other. And they end up signing a treaty, the Treaty of Verdun. And the kingdom is divided into 3 parts. The first part, which is basically France, goes to our hairy friend Charles the Bald. The second part, which has territories in Italy in it, goes to Lothair. And the third part, which is basically Germany, goes to Louis the German. Now, with that, the Holy Roman Empire is very weakened. It's very divided. The Carolingian Dynasty doesn't last much longer, even though it does resurface a couple of times, and then it ends finally in the late 900s AD.